The opening weeks of 2026 have witnessed a remarkable convergence of international diplomacy, territorial ambition, and strategic positioning that reveals much about the evolving nature of global power dynamics. At the center of this drama stands Russian President Vladimir Putin, navigating a complex landscape shaped by President Donald Trump's audacious foreign policy initiatives. Two developments in particular have captured international attention: Trump's creation of a Board of Peace focused on Gaza reconstruction and his increasingly aggressive pursuit of Greenland. Putin's measured responses to both situations offer a revealing window into Russia's strategic thinking and its approach to a rapidly changing world order. The juxtaposition of these two issues, one involving Middle Eastern peace and the other Arctic territorial ambitions, might seem disconnected at first glance. However, they represent two sides of the same coin: the reassertion of great power politics in an age where international norms and multilateral institutions face unprecedented challenges. Putin's reactions demonstrate a calculated strategy of opportunism, pragmatism, and carefully calibrated messaging designed to advance Russian interests while navigating the unpredictable landscape of Trump's second presidency. On Wednesday, January 21, 2026, Putin made a striking announcement during a meeting of the Russian Security Council in Moscow. He declared that Russia could contribute $1 billion from frozen Russian assets held in the United States to secure permanent membership in Trump's newly proposed Board of Peace. This proposal, both audacious and pragmatic, represents a masterclass in strategic positioning that addresses multiple Russian objectives simultaneously. The Board of Peace emerged as part of Trump's 20-point plan to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and manage Gaza's post-ceasefire reconstruction. Announced in January 2026, the initiative invites world leaders from approximately 60 countries to join an international body charged with overseeing funding, security coordination, and political transition in Gaza. The structure of the board is notable for its commercial approach to international diplomacy. Membership is free for the first 3 years, after which permanent membership requires a payment of $1 billion. This pay-to-play model has generated substantial controversy, with critics questioning whether effective peacebuilding can be achieved when influence is explicitly tied to financial contributions. Trump himself chairs the board, and invitations have been extended to a diverse array of global leaders, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Thai representatives, and notably, Vladimir Putin. The inclusion of the Russian president raised eyebrows across diplomatic circles, given Russia's ongoing full-scale invasion of Ukraine and Putin's international isolation following war crimes allegations. Putin's offer to use frozen Russian assets to pay for board membership demonstrates remarkable strategic thinking on several levels. Following Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Western nations froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian state assets. These funds have become a point of contention, with Ukraine and its allies arguing they should be used for Ukrainian reconstruction, while Russia maintains they were illegally seized and must be returned. By proposing to redirect $1 billion of these frozen assets to the Board of Peace, Putin accomplishes several objectives simultaneously. First, he reframes the narrative around frozen Russian money, positioning Russia as a constructive international actor willing to contribute to peace efforts rather than a pariah state whose assets have been justly confiscated. Second, the proposal implicitly challenges the legitimacy of the asset freeze by treating the money as if Russia retains control over it and can decide how it should be deployed. Third, by linking the payment to support for the Palestinian people, citing Moscow's special relations with the people of Palestine, Putin appeals to constituencies in the global South and Middle East, where Russia has sought to expand its influence. Putin instructed the Russian Foreign Ministry to study the proposal and coordinate Russia's position with partners, suggesting this is more than mere rhetoric. He indicated Russia could provide the $1 billion right now, even before we decide whether we'll take part in the work of the Board of Peace, framing the contribution as a gesture of goodwill independent of membership considerations. This approach gives Russia flexibility. Moscow can claim credit for supporting Palestinian reconstruction, while maintaining the option to decline formal board participation if the terms prove disadvantageous. The Board of Peace initiative and Putin's response to it highlight fundamental questions about the future of international conflict resolution. Traditional multilateral institutions like the United Nations have long operated on principles of sovereign equality and consensus building, even if imperfectly realized in practice. The Board of Peace, by contrast, explicitly links influence to financial contribution, creating a tiered system where wealthy nations can essentially purchase permanent seats at the table. This approach aligns with Trump's transactional view of international relations but raises concerns about equity and effectiveness. Critics have argued that the initiative could weaken existing frameworks for conflict resolution, particularly if it operates as a parallel institution competing with or undermining the UN Security Council. The fact that Putin, currently leading a war of aggression in Europe, has been invited to help oversee peace in the Middle East struck many observers as deeply ironic and potentially delegitimizing for the entire enterprise. Nevertheless, the Board of Peace has attracted significant international interest. Its focus on Gaza addresses a genuine need for coordinated reconstruction and governance support in the devastated territory. If implemented effectively and transparently, it could potentially provide resources and political coordination that existing institutions have struggled to deliver. However, the participation of controversial figures like Putin and the explicit commercialization of influence raise serious questions about the board's credibility and long-term viability. While Putin's engagement with the Board of Peace initiative has been active and strategic, his response to Trump's Greenland ambitions has been notably different, characterized by careful neutrality, historical contextualization, and subtle messaging designed to maximize Russian advantage without direct confrontation. Trump's interest in acquiring Greenland predates his second presidency. During his first term in 2019, he proposed purchasing the island from Denmark, an idea that was immediately and firmly rejected by both Danish and Greenlandic authorities. Upon returning to office in January 2025, Trump revived his Greenland ambitions with renewed vigor and increasingly aggressive rhetoric. The strategic importance of Greenland to the United States is genuine. The island hosts the Patuxent Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, which serves as a critical component of American early warning missile detection systems and space surveillance capabilities. Greenland's position provides the United States with strategic depth in the Arctic, a region of increasing geopolitical importance due to climate change opening new shipping routes and enabling access to substantial natural resources, including rare earth minerals, potential oil and gas reserves, and other critical materials. Trump has framed his Greenland pursuit in national security terms, arguing that the United States must secure full control of the island to protect it from Russian and Chinese influence. He has repeatedly claimed that Russian and Chinese vessels operate in Greenland's waters, posing a direct threat to American interests. This framing justifies what would otherwise appear to be an attempted seizure of territory from a NATO ally, an action that would fundamentally destabilize the transatlantic alliance that has underpinned Western security since World War II. By mid-January 2026, Trump's rhetoric had escalated dramatically. He refused to rule out using military force to take control of Greenland and announced plans to impose escalating tariffs on 8 European nations: Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, that were deploying troops to Greenland for joint NATO exercises dubbed Operation Arctic Endurance. The threatened tariffs would begin at 10% starting February 1st, 2026, and increase to 25% by June 1st, unless Denmark agreed to cede Greenland to the United States. This announcement shocked European capitals and triggered an unprecedented crisis within NATO. The prospect of the alliance's leading power using economic coercion and threatening military action against multiple member states represented an existential challenge to the principle of collective defense that has defined transatlantic relations for nearly 80 years. Against this backdrop of transatlantic turmoil, Putin has maintained a stance of studied neutrality regarding Trump's Greenland ambitions. On January 21, 2026, Putin stated that the Greenland situation doesn't concern us at all, adding, "I think they'll figure it out among themselves." This apparent disinterest stands in stark contrast to Russia's typically vigorous responses to perceived threats to its interests in the Arctic, where Moscow has invested heavily in military infrastructure and economic development. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, however, offered more substantive commentary while maintaining careful neutrality on the merits of Trump's proposal. Peskov described the situation as unusual, I would even say extraordinary from the standpoint of international law, acknowledging the far-reaching implications of a potential U.S. acquisition of Greenland. He noted that international experts believe such a move would secure Trump's place in history, not just American history but world history, though he carefully avoided endorsing or condemning the idea. This calibrated response reflects sophisticated strategic thinking. By refraining from direct criticism, Russia avoids unnecessarily antagonizing Trump at a time when Moscow hopes for American cooperation on ending the Ukraine war on terms favorable to Russia. Simultaneously, by highlighting the violation of international norms and the historical significance of such an unprecedented land grab, the Kremlin subtly undermines the legitimacy of Trump's actions while positioning Russia as a defender of international law, a somewhat ironic stance given Russia's own annexation of Crimea. Putin and other Russian officials have employed historical contextualization as a key element of their Greenland messaging. Putin noted that American interest in acquiring Greenland dates back to the 1760s, when the United States considered annexing both Greenland and Iceland, though the idea failed to gain congressional approval. He recalled that in 1910 there were negotiations between the United States, Germany, and Denmark regarding territorial exchanges that would have given Washington sovereignty over Greenland, though the deal ultimately failed. Following World War II, President Harry Truman offered Denmark $100 million for Greenland, an offer that was refused but led to the 1951 Defense Agreement, giving the United States extensive military access to the island. By emphasizing this historical pattern, Putin accomplishes several objectives. He normalizes Trump's current ambitions by placing them within a long tradition of American territorial expansion, suggesting this is not anomalous behavior, but rather consistent with historical American imperialism. This framing potentially reduces criticism of Russia's own territorial acquisitions by suggesting that great powers have always pursued such goals when opportunities arise. Most controversially, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov drew explicit parallels between Trump's Greenland bid and Russia's 2014 annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Lavrov stated that Crimea is no less important for Russian security than Greenland is for American security, directly equating Russia's internationally condemned seizure of Ukrainian territory with Trump's threatened acquisition of Greenland. This comparison serves multiple purposes. It seeks to legitimize Russia's actions in Crimea by suggesting that major powers routinely take control of territories they deem strategically necessary, and it highlights Western hypocrisy by juxtaposing condemnation of Russia's actions with apparent tolerance or even support for American territorial expansion. While Putin's public statements emphasize non-involvement, Russia has profound interests in the Arctic region that make Greenland's status highly relevant to Moscow's strategic calculations. Russia possesses the longest Arctic coastline of any nation, spanning 53% of the Arctic Ocean's perimeter. The region is crucial to Russia's economy, hosting major oil, gas, and mineral extraction operations that generate significant revenue and employment. Arctic sea routes, particularly the northern sea route along Russia's coast, are becoming increasingly navigable due to climate change, offering potential commercial and military advantages. Russia has invested heavily in Arctic military infrastructure, rebuilding and expanding bases along its northern coast, and fielding a fleet of icebreakers that dwarfs those of other nations. This military presence serves multiple functions: protecting Russia's economic interests, asserting sovereignty claims, and potentially enabling operations to control key strategic waterways in the event of conflict. Russian military planners have long focused on what's called bastion defense, establishing control over certain sea areas to protect ballistic missile submarines and deny adversary access to strategically important regions. The Geopolitics Gap, the maritime passage between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, represents a critical choke point for naval movements between the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Control or influence over Greenland would significantly enhance the ability to monitor and potentially control this passage. If the United States were to gain complete sovereignty over Greenland rather than merely maintaining base rights under an agreement with Denmark, it could substantially strengthen American and NATO's strategic position in Arctic competition with Russia. Despite these significant concerns, Russia has refrained from aggressive responses to Trump's Greenland campaign. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova criticized NATO military exercises in Greenland as yet another provocation and warned of serious consequences for attempts to ignore Russian security interests in the Arctic. However, this represents relatively measured rhetoric compared to the heated responses that might be expected given the strategic stakes involved. The most significant strategic benefit Russia derives from the Greenland crisis is not related to Arctic competition, but rather to the broader weakening of transatlantic unity and NATO cohesion. The alliance has been remarkably resilient in supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, with European nations increasing defense spending and maintaining unprecedented unity in imposing sanctions on Russia despite significant economic costs. Trump's threats against multiple European NATO members over Greenland have created the most serious rift in the alliance in decades, potentially accomplishing what Russian military pressure and political interference have failed to achieve. European leaders have explicitly drawn connections between defending Ukraine's sovereignty against Russian aggression and defending Denmark's sovereignty against American pressure. French President Emmanuel Macron stated that no intimidation or threat would influence European positions, neither in Ukraine, nor in Greenland, nor anywhere else in the world. This linkage places European governments in an impossible position. How can they credibly argue for collective defense against Russia while the alliance's leading member threatens military action and economic coercion against European allies? Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez articulated the dilemma clearly, warning that any American military action against Greenland would make Putin the happiest man in the world because it would legitimize Russia's attempted invasion of Ukraine. If the United States were to use force, Sanchez argued, it would be the death knell for NATO. Putin would be doubly happy. Indeed, Russian officials and state media have barely concealed their satisfaction at transatlantic tensions. Some Russian commentators have celebrated the situation as marking the end of leftist, globalist EU-UK elites and the collapse of transatlantic unity. Lavrov suggested Trump's Greenland bid heralds a deep crisis for NATO and raises questions about the alliance's preservation as a cohesive military political bloc. For Russia, NATO disunity serves multiple purposes. In the immediate term, it creates divisions that could affect continued European support for Ukraine, potentially strengthening Russia's position in eventual peace negotiations. More broadly, it advances Russia's long-standing strategic objective of weakening Western unity and undermining the institutions that have constrained Russian power since the Cold War. As security analysts have noted, Russia has always understood that it cannot defeat NATO militarily, but must instead defeat the alliance politically by exposing the hollowness of collective defense commitments and driving wedges between the United States and Europe. The Greenland situation has evolved rapidly since Trump's inauguration. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen described her country as facing a decisive moment in its diplomatic battle with the United States, with stakes extending far beyond Greenland's immediate future. European Union ambassadors held emergency meetings to coordinate responses to Trump's threats. 8 European countries issued a joint statement declaring that tariff threats undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte engaged in conversations with Trump, attempting to de-escalate the crisis, while European leaders scrambled to demonstrate their commitment to Greenland's defense without fundamentally rupturing relations with Washington. Operation Arctic Endurance, the joint NATO exercises in Greenland, proceeded with participation from Denmark, Germany, France, Sweden, and Norway, representing a clear signal that European nations would not be intimidated into abandoning collective defense commitments. By late January, there were indications that Trump's rhetoric might be moderating. Reports suggested his Davos comments represented a climb down from earlier aggressive positions, with pressure from his own advisors contributing to a reversal of policy. However, the damage to transatlantic trust may prove difficult to repair, regardless of whether Trump ultimately pursues Greenland acquisition through diplomatic, economic, or military means. Examining Putin's responses to both the Board of Peace Initiative and the Greenland crisis reveals a coherent strategic approach characterized by flexibility, opportunism, and careful calculation of risks and benefits. Putin's willingness to engage actively with the Board of Peace demonstrates pragmatic recognition that cooperation with the Trump administration on selective issues can advance Russian interest without requiring comprehensive alignment. By offering to contribute to Gaza reconstruction using frozen assets, Putin simultaneously addresses Middle Eastern constituencies Russia hopes to influence, challenges the legitimacy of Western sanctions, and potentially gains access to an international forum that could expand Russia's diplomatic reach. This approach reflects an evolution in Russian foreign policy from the confrontational stance that characterized much of the post-2014 period. While Russia maintains its positions on core issues like Ukraine, Crimea, and NATO expansion, Putin has shown willingness to identify areas of potential cooperation with the United States under Trump's leadership. The Board of Peace represents one such area where Russia can participate without compromising fundamental interests, while potentially gaining influence and reshaping international norms around conflict resolution. Conversely, Putin's restrained response to the Greenland crisis demonstrates strategic patience and awareness that sometimes the best action is inaction. The transatlantic tensions generated by Trump's Greenland campaign serve Russian interests without requiring any Russian effort or risk. By maintaining public neutrality while Russian officials offer subtle commentary, highlighting international law violations and historical parallels, Moscow positions itself as a reasonable actor observing Western dysfunction rather than actively contributing to it. This approach contrasts sharply with Russia's typical responses to perceived threats in its sphere of influence, where Moscow often responds aggressively to maintain deterrence and demonstrate resolve. The Greenland situation is different because any Russian criticism or intervention might paradoxically strengthen transatlantic unity by providing a common adversary against which Europe and America could rally. By staying on the sidelines, Putin allows the West's internal contradictions to play out without interference. Both Putin's Board of Peace engagement and his Greenland neutrality must be understood within the broader context of Russia's strategic position in early 2026. Nearly 4 years into the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has achieved territorial gains but failed to accomplish its original objectives of regime change in Kyiv and preventing Ukraine's Western integration. The war has proven costly in terms of casualties, economic impacts from sanctions, and international isolation. Simultaneously, Russia has deepened its relationship with China and strengthened ties with countries in the global south, positioning itself as a leader of a multipolar world order challenging Western dominance. Trump's return to the presidency represented a potential opportunity for Russia to achieve a favorable resolution to the Ukraine conflict and restore elements of the U.S.-Russia relationship. However, this requires careful navigation, as Trump's unpredictability and the continued hostility of the U.S. foreign policy establishment toward Russia create significant uncertainties. Putin's approach has been to maintain pressure in Ukraine while signaling openness to negotiations, seek areas of potential cooperation like the Board of Peace, and exploit opportunities created by Trump's disruption of traditional alliances and international norms. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these interconnected developments is their inherent irony. Putin, who launched Europe's largest war since World War II and stands accused of numerous war crimes, has been invited to join an international board of peace focused on conflict resolution. Trump, who portrays Russia as a threat to Greenland's security that justifies potential U.S. military action, simultaneously invites Putin to participate in an initiative supposedly aimed at promoting global stability. These contradictions reveal the transactional, norm-breaking nature of international relations in the current era. Traditional principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and collective security are being challenged not by their rejection in rhetoric but by their selective application in practice. When major powers can simultaneously claim to defend international law while violating it, when international peace initiatives include leaders accused of war crimes, and when alliance commitments can be threatened for commercial or territorial gain, the entire framework of the post-World War II international order comes into question. For Putin, these contradictions create opportunities. Russia has long argued that Western rhetoric about rules-based international order masked a reality of selective enforcement serving Western interests. Trump's actions regarding Greenland, his transactional approach to alliances, and his willingness to include Putin in peace initiatives, despite Russia's actions in Ukraine, all serve to validate this Russian narrative. The more the United States and its allies appear to apply standards selectively based on power and interest rather than principle, the more credible Russia's claims of Western hypocrisy become. As of late January 2026, both the Board of Peace Initiative and the Greenland crisis remain fluid situations whose ultimate outcomes are unclear. The Board of Peace could evolve into a meaningful mechanism for coordinating Gaza reconstruction or could founder on questions of legitimacy, effectiveness, and participant commitment. The Greenland situation could escalate into a genuine crisis threatening NATO's existence or could be diffused through diplomatic engagement and Trump's apparent willingness to moderate earlier demands. What is clear is that Putin has positioned Russia to benefit from either outcome. If the Board of Peace succeeds in establishing a new framework for international conflict resolution that diminishes the role of traditional multilateral institutions, Russia gains increased influence and an alternative forum to the UN Security Council where it faces consistent Western opposition. If the board fails, Russia has lost little beyond a potential payment from already frozen assets. If the Greenland crisis continues to divide NATO and undermine transatlantic unity, Russia's strategic position vis-à-vis Europe improves significantly. If the crisis is resolved, Russia maintains the historical and legal precedents that could potentially justify its own territorial actions. This flexible, opportunistic approach reflects Putin's understanding that in the current international environment, characterized by rapid change, declining adherence to traditional norms, and the reassertion of great power competition, the most successful strategy may be to maintain multiple options, avoid unnecessary commitments, and position oneself to capitalize on developments shaped primarily by others' actions. The coming months will reveal whether this strategic patience serves Russia's interests, or whether more active engagement or opposition to American initiatives would have proven more beneficial. For now, Putin appears content to watch, comment selectively, and allow the inherent tensions in Trump's foreign policy to work in Russia's favor. Whether this calculation proves correct will significantly influence not just Russian interests, but the broader shape of international relations in an increasingly uncertain and multipolar world. The Board of Peace and the Greenland crisis, seemingly disconnected issues, together illustrate the fundamental transformation occurring in global politics. Traditional alliances face unprecedented strain. International law is invoked more often than observed, and transactional relationships are replacing principled partnerships. In this environment, Putin's measured responses, engaging where beneficial, remaining neutral where advantageous, and constantly seeking opportunities to advance Russian interests may prove more effective than the more predictable approaches that characterized earlier eras of international diplomacy. As the world navigates this uncertain terrain, Russia's role in shaping outcomes, whether through direct action or strategic patience, remains a critical factor in determining the future of global order.